Hi, welcome to Power of Story. We're going to talk about story, which refers to not just stories from books or movies, but stories we tell ourselves. And we don't even have to write them down. These stories go on in our mind, and we'll talk about that as we get into it. I'll start by telling you the basics of my story. I grew up in a family in Los Angeles. My parents divorced when I was 14. And because of different circumstances, my parents made the decision to leave me with another family in Los Angeles. My mother moved to Phoenix with her new husband, and my father traveled a lot for work. So then after I finally rejoined my family and I finished high school, and then I went to college. And right after college, I joined the Hare Krishna movement for 10 years. And then I got out, and then I got a master's degree, and that's my basic story of my life. So I want to talk to you about neuroscience. That's the study of the mind. It's a medical term. But neuroscience, some decades ago, they determined that the DMN, the default mode network of the brain, is story. And that involves your prefrontal cortex, 2 parts in the back and they kind of bounce back and forth telling stories. And that's what you do with your mind when you're not doing something like working with numbers or having a meeting or, involved in something in the outside world. So the default network functions when you're daydreaming, when you're gardening, when you're driving in your car, when you're cleaning your house, when you're sitting around, when you're waking up, when you're going to sleep. When you're sleeping, dreams are considered part of the default mode network of the brain. And the mind makes up stories. It weaves stories. That's what we do. And they're not like stories like, something that you could publish as a short story. They're stories about what you're going to do, what you did yesterday, what you're going to tell people about what you did. Like, oh, when I get home, I'm going to see the people there. I'm going to tell them how my day went. Here's what I'm going to tell them. Or you might think, well, okay, the rest of my day, I'm probably going to go to the market and do my homework, and then I'm going to come home. And then so this is storytelling. Just the thoughts we keep in our mind are parts of stories. And we use the stories to kind of tell ourselves who we are, what we stand for, who we tell the world about who we are. And those are all part of the default mode network. Things you can do to modulate the network to make it change are the amount of sleep you get. Like if you sleep well, you might have more positive stories. If you can't sleep, you might go into sort of more negative modes. Psychotherapy can help straighten out what goes on up there. Abuse or maltreatment can make things worse. You might they say physical exercise can help. Like if you're not feeling good and you're feeling very negative and you go take a walk and it's really nice out and you come back, you feel better because of moving. If you meditate, if that doesn't trigger you from your call to, meditation is said to have a positive effect on the mind. And then drugs can alter it. Drugs usually make things worse, but they do affect how our default mode network works. And so the next thing is how stories influence our behavior and our life. Stories store information. The word stories does not come from the word store, but it comes from a different origin, but it does store. So you can remember stories store information. And the information is very essential to us. In fact, most of our brain the reason our brain is so complex is so that we can keep track of all the stories, because they tell us who we are, and it also tells us who about the people around us. Like we know such and such person has kids, and we've known them a long time. We knew them since before they had their kids, and or before they moved here, so we know how they got here. And so they're just stories about what we know about other people. And stories set the tone of our lives. We make decisions based on our stories, because our beliefs, our attitudes, our feelings, our moods, everything is wrapped up in what we think about in our mind. And they influence our decisions and how we construct our lives based on our stories. So we're going to talk about positive versus negative stories. So positive stories are stories that make us feel good. We feel calm. They help us feel self-confident. They help us feel relaxed and capable, because we have stories like, oh, I can do this, or I'm good at this. I'm going to take a shot at this. Now, fear-based stories or negative stories are the opposite. They break us down. They eat away at our self-esteem, our self-confidence. We may feel rejected, like we may feel self-pity. We may avoid opportunities because we don't have any self-confidence. So, if a good opportunity comes up, we'll be like, I don't think that would work for me. So fear-based stories can really affect our lives. And I want to talk about the autonomic nervous system, which is another brain science thing. But the autonomic nervous system is affected by our feelings and stress. So if we're thinking about stressful things all the time, we might sweat, it might raise our heart rate. We might get shallow breathing or quick breathing where we're nervous. We might feel tension. We might get the fight or flight effect where we're angry, or we're going to run, or we're going to fight. So stories can really, what we keep in our minds, our stories really affect our daily life. So we're going to talk about how to change the stories, how to improve our stories. It's up to us what we keep in our mind. Now that we're out of our cult, maybe when we were in the cult leader decided what we should think about. But now that we're out, it's really up to us to decide what to think about and what stories to keep. And if we want to upgrade our thoughts and upgrade our our image, we can do it. There's ways to replace fear-based stories and other stories that don't help us or heal us. So here's a few examples of how this can help. Suppose someone is in a cult and they have a certain story about the cult and the cult leader, where they believe that the cult leader is a chip off of God. He's the real thing, and he knows everything he does is perfect because he's God's son, or he's God himself, or whatever they teach you in the cult. But say like your story starts to change, like say the person starts thinking, no, he's really not that nice, and gee, he sure made some mistakes there, and maybe he's not really God. I mean, how could this guy be, he doesn't really seem like he's God. And so they start to change their story to be more realistic. It could lead to them leaving the group. But as long as they cling on to their story that the guy is as good as God, they're going to stay in the group, because why would you want to betray God? Another example, suppose someone leaves a cult, but they have very negative stories about what people will think of them if they find out that they were in a cult. So they may try to hide that they were in a cult, and if they're forced to talk about it, they feel really embarrassed and ashamed and things like that. But then say they change their story. Instead of being self-conscious about having been in the cult, suppose they start to think, well, I got out of the cult, I'm out now. So they feel more confident, like, well, if I told someone I was in a cult, but I got out, then that's a good story. I was in it and I got out. It's like a hero's journey. I'm out now and I learned from it. So they could change their story and feel better about themselves. And then the classic story of like that can affect someone whether they were in a cult or not is the story that we're here to fix other people. So you might have this friend that's got all kinds of problems and they're always in some kind of, digging themselves into some kind of ditch. And you feel like it's really your job to fix them. And you know exactly how they could, fix themselves. So you go around trying to help them, and, it becomes a real chore, and you can get mad and it's frustrating because you really never can fix someone else. It's really up to them. Unless you're a professional, if you're a psychologist or something, then I suppose you do help people fix their problems, but mostly by listening to them. But say like someone's going around thinking that they have to fix their brother or their husband or their sister or their kid, something, and they're driving themselves nuts, their next door neighbor or whoever it is that's become their latest project. But say they change their story. So their story is no longer that they have to fix people. Their story is that they could just let people be the way they are, and that's the best thing to do. So now they have a new story that really frees them from a lot of obligations and things that they had put on themselves, and they could let someone be. And if they don't like someone the way they are, then they can distance themselves. And, unless it's like someone you live with, you don't have to be around certain people if you don't want to. Unless it's like for a job, that's a whole different subject. But just in general, someone with a negative story that they have to fix someone can do themselves a favor by changing that story. So now I had a very negative story about myself. And so I'm going to talk about how I finally changed it. I changed it by studying my journal. I had kept a journal since I was 23, when I was in the Hare Krishna temple. Now I joined the Hare Krishnas in 78, but they wouldn't let me keep a journal for about a year. But then after I'd been with them for about 6 months, they said I could keep a journal since I really wanted to, but I could only write about my spiritual realizations and my prayers. So they said that I could write about those two things, and that I could only record a dream if it was about God, because they really thought dreams were just, fantasies, and that it just depended on what you ate that night, and didn't really mean anything. So they really discouraged trying to keep track of dreams or write down dreams. Okay, now the scope of my collection, I started when I was 23. And then when I was about 29, I got permission to record all my dreams. And then I just gave myself permission to write down whatever I wanted. So starting at 29, I tracked all my dreams. I recorded all my dreams. And I used my notebook just like a regular writer's notebook. I wrote in it. It was a diary. It was my workbook. I just wrote in it all the time. And then later on, after I left ISKCON and I had published my memoir about ISKCON, a library wanted my collection of my papers having to do with my memoir. So I donated all my papers to UC Santa Barbara for their collection called the American Religions Collection, ARC. And it's the largest collection of cultic material in the country, possibly largest collection in the world. And so they wanted my papers and they wanted my diaries. So I gave it all to them. And then when I was about to turn 60, I thought, I've got all these boxes and boxes of diaries. And if I die, they're just going to be boxes of diaries sitting in boxes. No one's going to ever look at them. Or if they do, they're going to certainly misunderstand everything. And I just wanted to do something with that. Plus, I knew I had a lot of dreams. I thought maybe I had recorded at least 1,000 dreams, and that those dreams would just go to waste unless I did something with them. So I drove up to UC Santa Barbara for my 60th birthday, And I spent my birthday in California. And I went to the library and I got they brought me out all the journals, and I put them in chronological order, and I looked through them all, and I wrote down what I had. I made a list of them, and I listed the dates that they covered, and I, put together this big long list of all that. I had like about 250 notebooks that I had donated to them. And then I thought, well, I got to find out who uses dream journals, because I have some dream journals I could share. And there was a school of psychology nearby UC Santa Barbara called Pacifica Graduate Institute. So I went down there because I thought if any college uses dream journals, it would be them, because it's a very progressive school. And I met with the head of special research collections there. And he said, frankly, nobody uses dream journals. I don't know of any college that does. Good luck. So I thanked him, and I when I drove home, I went on the internet and I found the people who use dream journals. And it's a little obscure branch of psychology called dream content analysis. And it was started in the 1960s by two researchers, Dr. Hall and Dr. Van de Kassel. And they set aside the categories for study to collect statistics from dreams. So they would get like large dream collections from people who had kept dream journals, or they would do sleep lab studies where they would have people record their dreams. You have to have a minimum of 100 dreams to make a sample. And then they would code them. They would code them for characters, settings, plots, social interactions, activities, objects, and emotions. And then they would code all the things they found and count them. And then they would interview the dreamer and then find out if the things they found in the dreams were pertinent to the person's waking life and draw conclusions. So the object of dream content analysis is to verify three continuities: daytime to dream experiences, one person's dreams over time, and all people's dreams. So daytime to dream means like if you dream a lot about your mother, and then they interview the dreamer, and the dreamer confirms that their mother is a very important part of their life, maybe a stress or a concern to them, or someone that they depend on, or something like that. And they found a high correlation between what people dream about and what's going on in their daytime life. Like if a real estate agent, say someone dreams about houses all the time, well, it turns out they're a real estate agent. Or say someone dreams they're flying all the time, well, it turns out they're a cabin attendant for an airline, and that's what they do all the time. So they dream about being on airplanes. And they've learned a lot about dreams through this system. It's not very well known, but I mean, it took me a long time to find them, and I did find them, and they were happy that I have this long dream journal. And they actually encouraged me to type it, because unless it's typed and digitized, it's harder to search for statistics. Once it's typed, you can just do searches. And nowadays they do computer word string searches, and they draw conclusions from that. So I realized there was no computer program in the world that could read my handwriting or do optical character scanning of my handwriting. So in 2018, I sat down and started typing from the beginning. The first 10 years of the journal was written when I was in ISKCON. So then I coded the main characters, and to find out if they were the people that were the most important people in my life. And it turned out they were. My main characters in my dreams are my father, mother, brother, husband, 4 best friends that I've known since childhood, and a few people from ISKCON. So when I was in ISKCON, I dreamed mostly about ISKCON people, but they faded from my dreams once I left the group. So when I went to Santa Barbara, I had to go to Santa Barbara because that's where my notebooks were held. And that was where I typed the ISKCON years, the first 10 years. I went there for 2 weeks in January and 2 weeks in March. I worked in the library 40 hours a week during the hours they were open, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And over those 40 hours, plus I worked on the weekend, I would bring a notebook home and work on it back at the Airbnb. And I typed the entire 10 years of the ISKCON notebooks. And it was so enlightening because I had met the Hare Krishnas in Isla Vista. It was just a coincidence that they also had the biggest collection of cultic studies and that they wanted my papers. But it was so refreshing to be back in Santa Barbara, in Isla Vista, the college town, and to be going over my journals that I kept while I was in ISKCON, and then revisiting my real life before I joined the temple. When I wasn't typing at the library, I walked around Isla Vista. I went to see the old apartment where I lived. I went to see the apartment building where the Hare Krishnas had set up a preaching center, which is where I became involved. I walked to the beach. I walked to the co-op where I used to volunteer when I lived there. And it was really edifying, and it was really a good time for me. And I was able to really process my experience, and I remembered things differently. Like I had a chance to review my life in ISKCON. And, at first it was when I first joined and I was just writing about my spiritual realizations and my prayers, it was just so cringeworthy. Like I'd write these sort of brainwashed things about how ecstatic everything was, and my guru was so wonderful, and just crazy, weird stuff. And I would type it and I'd be thinking, oh God, I was so brainwashed. And I was kind of mad at myself. I mean, I was really mad at myself for being so brainwashed. But then as I went on and the years went by into the years where I was writing everything, and I had become more of a normal person, and I kind of liked that, seeing that I wasn't brainwashed as I started out to be. And then there was a time in my career in ISKCON where we started to become sort of rebellious to the organization because they were so intent on covering up all their crimes. And I worked in the PR office, so I had to be part of that. And it was a difficult, I felt guilty about it, but I could see how I was changing, and how they weren't. Like the organization was sort of going downhill, and I was sort of like pulling away from it. And then at one point, when our guru left, they cut off our budget for the PR department. So, it was kind of difficult at first, but my husband and we had been typesetting the ISKCON World Review. We did that newspaper for 8 years. And at one point we switched over to using desktop publishing, which is really common now, but back in the 80s, it was a brand new thing. So my husband and I opened a freelance company, our own company, doing freelance typesetting. And we immediately got this great job typesetting the Orange County Business Line, which is the newspaper for the Orange County Chamber of Commerce. And we got the job through a friend who worked for them. And so the boss was already familiar with Hare Krishna. It didn't bother him at all. And we got this job doing his paper, and we could do the paper in about a week. He would send us all the articles and the ads, and we typeset the ads and, for extra. And then we typeset the newspaper and gave it back to him in a week. And it paid all our bills. So we still had time to do our devotional stuff and the ISKCON World Review and all that. So I was actually kind of proud of myself remembering that. I mean, I had blocked that out. And then when we left, it was on my own terms. I was ready to leave. And I actually look back on it as being a kind of positive experience because of getting myself out. So reading the daytime notations refreshed my memory and corrected a few misconceptions that I had, and filled in a few things that I had forgotten. And then reading the dreams side by side because it would be like daytime notation dream, because I remembered at least one dream every morning in those days. And the dreams were so reassuring and comforting and kind. They didn't judge me. I would be judging myself, but the dreams would be so compassionate and kind, it seemed like. So that was how I changed my story. Before I typed the ISKCON years and then the rest of the years, I saw my story was that I saw myself as stupid and gullible for joining a cult and really stupid for staying as long as I did. And I considered myself really dishonest and kind of evil for having taken part in all that. And I thought my family was mad at me and disliked me and that I had let them down by joining a cult. But then after I typed all the notebooks, I realized I understood why my younger self, I understood my younger self and why I stayed in the cult so long, because I needed a family, because my family experience ended when I was 14. And I never really felt like I was part of that family again. But I was able to kind of make up that lost time. And I realized that it wasn't my fault ISKCON went downhill. I did my best to try to, do what we could to try to help them and save their reputation. But there was really I couldn't have saved them. I couldn't have changed them. And no one person could have. It was the whole organization. And anyway, I beat myself up endlessly and felt guilty. But after realizing that it wasn't my problem to fix and it wasn't my fault they went downhill, I was able to finally let go of my guilt, which I thought would never happen. So that's how I fixed my story. And I felt much more positive in my 60s. I'm now 66. And so it's been 6 years of just healing and feeling much better about my experience and about my younger self. But I just wanted to add one more thing to the presentation before we open it up for live questions and question and answer time. And that is that there are other methods to befriend yourself besides typing your journal. And most people don't keep a journal that long. So I just wanted to add some extra information for people who are interested in upgrading their inner stories. Okay, first of all, we need to calm down those negative thoughts because that's what drags people down. So there's a lot of things you can do to control those negative thoughts where your mind wanders in the default mode. Notice the thoughts, notice your moods and feelings and attitudes, and just sit with them. Just try to be with them and find out what they want. Don't try to suppress them or run away from them or hate yourself for it. Just be with it and listen to it. And also learn to soften it as you're listening. Only do this if we're already, if you have really negative thoughts, try to do it in conjunction with having counseling, because counseling really helps. Don't try to do this on your own if you're really depressed. And also, as you're going through your feelings, decide if you need to make amends, because when we were in the cult, a lot of people go in the cult, they play both sides. They're the victim and they're the cult leaders. They push this on other people. We try to get people to join, and we try to, there's always both sides. We were a little bit victim, a little bit offender, so if you can make amends for some of the things that you did, do it. And otherwise, just, try to make amends in general. Don't take it out on people that now that had nothing to do with your cult experience. Be kind, treat other people the way you would want to be treated. So also be careful about being overly critical. Like if you beat yourself up over something that happened 30 years ago where you forgot someone's name, that's going a little overboard. Just try to see yourself. If someone else was going through what you're going through, what you went through, and then they're beating themselves up for something that happened 30 years ago where they lost somebody's something, got someone's name wrong, or, missed an appointment, or something that really still bothers you, that is really meaningless. No one remembers it except you. It didn't hurt anyone. It's just you felt bad about yourself. Just let it go. Think of how you would treat someone else that had done the same thing. Another thing you can do that really helps is to arrange your environment so that it has more positive things in it that nurture you. Like bring in good things like books, music, art, new interests, hobbies. Bring in good people, try to meet good people. If you think you might want a pet and you could take care of it, pets are very therapeutic, usually. Bring in objects to your home that bring good memories. And then also try to weed out negative influences, like get rid of objects that hold bad memories. If you don't need them, just get them or replace them with something that will serve you better. Stop engaging with people that you don't like. You can't fix people, but you can distance from them. And also improve your lifestyle. Eat better, quit smoking if you smoke, quit taking substances or alcohol if you take it, quit when you're ready. And then finally, love yourself as you are. Consider putting a photo. I read this somewhere. Consider putting a photo of your younger self where you can see it, and try to develop empathy for your younger self. And then, let all the confused feelings and flaws and all of your faults and everything just be there, and appreciate yourself anyway, even with all your flaws. So that's all I have to say right now, and we'll end this session and go into the live portion of the presentation.